Hello everyone, I'm Milo and welcome to my town. Welcome to the second part of this mini-series on Kirby and the Forgotten Land Star-Crossed World Lore Deep Dive. In the previous video, I discussed about the Ancients, the Meteors and the Elfilin siblings. I recommend you check it out if you haven't already, as some of the things we'll mention here will allude to that. For this video, it's finally time we get to the deeper parts of the lore that this DLC laid out for us. During the last video, I mentioned that one songstress plenty of times, beating around the bush about their identity. That was on purpose, as there's plenty to talk about, so I figured it's finally time to introduce her. If you check the credits for the Forgotten Land and went to the song section, you'd see that the credit for Welcome to the New World is attributed to one Neichel. The same can be seen for Twinkling Star Showers in Star-Crossed World. So, who is Neichel? Well, this is Neichel. At the 2022 Kirby 30th Anniversary Music Fest, a special performance of Welcome to the New World was performed, with the singer being introduced as Neichel. It went from a transition from the ancient letters to Roman ones, a cool touch. Neichel was a mysterious woman wearing a green dress and a hat, and the first half of the song was even performed in the ancient language, just like it appears in the game. But why is this relevant for the lore of the actual Kirby games? Believe it or not, her existence may just be one of the most pivotal points we've gotten for the overall lore of the franchise. Neichel was one of the Ancients, former residents of the land, and a songstress among them. One day, she had a prophetic dream, one linked to the old legends of the Meteors. In that dream, she saw a future, one that matched parts of the legends, and sharing what she saw helped to further the interpretation of those legends, which had mostly fallen to obscurity and been treated as fairy tales. Sometime after, with Elfilin's arrival, parts of her revelation started ringing true, as we've established in the previous video, causing the course of the legend to continue as the Ancients developed the technology that could take them to the stars. Neichel, being an artist, decided to make a song based on the prophecy and her dream. That song would become Twinkling Star Showers, and the Ancients chose her as a sort of ambassador for their interplanetary plan. On top of that song, she also created Welcome to the New World, a song that completely supports the campaign of the operation. Slightly unrelated, but the amusement park of Wondaria was also constructed to ease the residents into the idea of space travel. After the warp technology was finalized and the ships were getting ready for departure, in order to bring peace to the people, advertisements for the entire campaign, led by Neichel's imagery, started to be put up. On this first figure we can see an advertisement for the release of Twinkling Star Showers. The Japanese description explicitly states that this was an actual ad used for the campaigns, and that it was debuting on March 25th, the day of departure. This isn't all too relevant, but it's a reference to the release date of the Forgotten Land on March 25th, 2022. The song debuted and was played on board, to ease and give hope to the people boarding. The figure of design is kind of rusty and worn down, and can be obtained in the first few levels of the DLC, but on the second volume of the figures, a pristine condition version can be found. Before reading the description, we can actually read the text on it properly, and it says the following: Twinkling Star Showers, 325 new releases. The legend of Meteors is brought back to life in the modern era with Neichel's voice. So it's a sort of cycle once again. The prophetic dream that revealed this would happen brought this song to life, and now it was being played on one of the very moments it talked about. Quite poetic. Anyway, the second sign tells us some very interesting information. First is that as well as on the ships themselves, the song kept being broadcasted in the hangar, even after departure. The second is that some people actually chose to remain on the land, including Neichel herself. While no motivation is told to us, one could assume a smaller group of people just could not fathom leaving the place that was their home, and chose to stay back, despite the likely guaranteed survival that going with the others would have implied. Let's talk about the ships that were used to depart this land. We get a figure with one of them, labeled the Spaceship New World. On its side there is some text that translates to "This spaceship, New World, Type 0. This ship is really interesting. The description says that it is an early model of what was used to travel to the stars, and as we know, that song was used on board. Now, I would admit that alone I would have not come to this realization, but people look closely to its shape, and it matches the top part of the Lord Tsar cutter to a T. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, if there was any doubt that the residents of this land were the ancients, now we have concrete proof linking a design from this world being used exactly in an artifact that we know for a fact belonged to the ancients. So, does it mean that they built the Lord to leave the Forgotten Land? No, at least I highly doubt it, and I'll present my reasons here. A lot of people have been convinced that due to the similarities, this was the early model, then the Lord was a finished product, but I don't think the evidence supports this. For starters, the Japanese description explicitly uses the term ships that resembled this one. The nuance of that term implies a similarity. Going from just this spot to a full-on ship added underneath is a long stretch. Next, in the good condition of the sign, we can actually see the pod itself right here, a part that was conveniently obscured by the erosion in the decayed signs. Finally, we can actually see some of these spots in the section underneath the volcanic island. Presumably, this was one, if not the departure hangar from where the ships took flight. Given how a group of people decided to stay back, it makes sense why some of the ships would remain there. By the way, fun fact, in the battle against the Crystal Chaos Elfilin, when he does an attack of raining down debris in the arena, said debris actually comes with the New World species on them, a detail that is really easy to miss. I do not believe that the true final design of these spots was all that different from what we see here, but I do believe that after they left, the ancients repurposed this technology for the Lord Star Cutter. Or maybe not quite. More on that later. Anyway, that's mostly the end of the story. Most of the ancients left on the New World ships, while a smaller group remained back in the land they called home. Incidentally, knowing these ships were called New World and their function was to travel to a new world, brings an deeper meaning to the titular song, Welcome to the New World. The figure descriptions we've seen always talk of a song, but they all seem to specifically imply twinkling star showers. However, it would seem that Welcome to the New World also played in there. In fact, I think the very recording that plays on that hangar was likely the one that kept playing on the ships, without the clear corrupted audio from the passage of time, of course. When you consider the type of song and vibe that Welcome to the New World has, it fits the Wondaria theme a lot, so it could have potentially debuted earlier and played in there, leading up to the departure, with twinkling star showers only debuting on the day off. Then time went by and the events of the game happened. Except that's not quite the entire case. Hidden within the game lays dormant one final secret that deepens the lore on a bigger scale yet. 100% completion is required. That is all figures, all What of These, all Starries and all Coliseum tournaments. Only once you've done everything available in the game and you head over to the Delete This live stage, a new secret song will appear at the end of the list, titled Last Song, Neichel's unfinished track. The song was meant to have lyrics, but it seems to not have them recorded. We can still see what they would have been by remaining on the stage. And when you analyze their content, you'll see the secret meaning hidden in them. The song begins on what appears to be a one-person operated setup, as you can first hear the sound of footsteps, leading to testing notes on a synthesizer, and activating a metronome to measure the rhythm. Then, the lyrics begin. I recommend watching it first, as I'll break it down in segments here. I uploaded it as another video because most uploads I kept seeing left out a part of the tune that will prove to have some importance. Also, I'll be referring to the lyrics from the perspective of my translation of them from the original Japanese, but as I alluded to in the previous video, the letters in the ancient language decode to English, so both versions could be taken into account for a more complete understanding. The song seems to be mainly split into two parts separated by the chorus. On the first half, Neichel seems to show some regret after her decision to stay back. We don't know the actual motivations that led her to take that choice, She likely felt a very large emotional connection to her homeland that she simply couldn't imagine leaving behind. I'm sure making such a choice must have been a big thing and not just a spur of the moment. Yet, the fact remains that she, alongside an unknown number of other people, remained behind, while the rest of the ancients took to the stars. During the first half of the song, we can see that she kept having dreams, whether actual ones or just daydreaming, of reaching that faraway place, the dreamland where her people went. Later we hear some wording about an empty amusement park, blurring with the starry sky, and evoking memories from the past. I believe this wording can mainly tell us that she was very fond of Wandaria. After all, we've established the likeliness that Welcome to the New World was the theme song for Wandaria itself, making a proper connection between her and the park. She would likely spend a lot of her time there after everyone else had left, which would result in her including it as part of the lyrics on this song. This could also explain why during the events of the game, the park was still operational and running. Related to this, there is an interesting thing that we can find in the Crossing Wandaria level. One of the side missions is to hop into an out-of-the-way Ferris wheel cabin, and the mission description is to make a memory. Inside this cabin we can see some text in ancient language that translates to "See you in the New World," with a picture of the spaceship painted alongside. This mostly looks like graffiti and not a proper advertisement message imprinted onto the cabin. However, I'm not quite convinced it would have been done prior to the departure, so it looks more like an after-the-fact act, especially since it would have likely been cleaned up otherwise. We cannot say for certain if Neichel herself wrote this, but if we look at it from a melancholic standpoint for having missed the chance to depart with everyone, it could be read as a slightly ironic message left after the fact, wishing it was done beforehand. The next few verses continue to expose the desire of her to want to follow along what her people did, wanting to warp around through space and time, while watching the stars from a window. It also mentions, "Is this the future that I foresaw?" linking back to her original prophetic dreams that foretold the events that would come. Finally, we get to the chorus. It talks about wanting to go on a flying star to the neighboring town, to hopefully enjoy a fruit pie. This chorus is mostly metaphorical from what we know so far. Neighboring town is likely a wording for the planet or place where the ancients likely settled, expressing her desire to meet up and see all the people she knew again. The cake and pie part can have a deeper meaning, but we'll return to it later. The second half of the song brings an even more interesting point of view, as it seems to happen from potentially different points in time, one of which may actually be the future talking about the past, or rather how her future self may think. Let's go over it. She talks about looking back at the old days on that planet, those which they cannot go back to. This can either be even more reminiscent about the older times, or something has changed drastically that specifically has her using that expression of that planet. One line has her mentioning a swaying spring that can be seen within her dreams, or when she closes her eyes. Personally, I think this specifically talks about the fantasy of dreams itself, which mind you has been confirmed to be made by the ancients. The mention of it likely suggests that it is somehow within her reach, or will be soon. Then we get to one of the most interesting verses in the song. I'll simply read out the translated version that conveys the message. "A gate to a dimension won't suffice. Relying on AI, my heart is a machine now. Is this really my desire? Repeatedly warping, traversing space and time. There's a breath on the window as a Ferris wheel turns." This is probably a lot to unpack, and there's a lot of differences between the English and Japanese. The first phrase probably indicates simply opening a portal is not enough, or won't suffice for a certain purpose. Then we have relying on AI with a machine heart. Interestingly enough, the English version seems to be one not to use the term AI on the lyrics, whereas most other languages do. Instead, they use the terms artificial heart and pulse that pounds. Both end up transmitting the idea that somehow she became mechanized. From the Japanese, it's hard to properly interpret the window phrase, but the English uses "read upon my window." There's another mention of a Ferris wheel that I want to touch back on later. An extra thing here is the mention of "I hope I don't meet me" in the English lyrics, which a lot of people have taken to interpret in interesting ways. as if one traveled through space-time, one could meet themselves indeed. However, this line was added to the English version as the Japanese doesn't really have it at all. There, it is only warping repeatedly. I'll share my thoughts on this afterwards, but for now I choose to consider it not important. Finally, the second chorus that also concludes the lyrics has some important changes. For one, the verse says, "I don't have white wings yet, but I will have them soon." This can have multiple interpretations. A green one where the white wings simply symbolizes death, as in the wings of an angel, so she's mentioning how she would die eventually and disappear from this world. The other meaning will link to a later point. The entire song ends with the mention of "a red fruit pie will be one last sweet memory, dreamy memory." The English version doesn't emphasize this, but the Japanese uses the term last specifically, which I believe is somehow relevant. With that, the lyrics come to a close. As the tune finishes, we can eventually hear her stepping away, in a similar fashion of how the recording started. A cool detail hidden here is that if you listen closely to the final part, you can hear some beeping that spells out Neichel in Morse code. This is the part that most uploads of the song simply cut out, which is unfortunate. But actually, we missed something. There's a much bigger theme we haven't analyzed yet. Just before the footsteps on the Morse code, there's a particular set of sounds at play. Please listen to them. Sounds familiar? Maybe an eerie feeling that you've heard this thing before? I chose to delay several factors throughout our analysis because I needed to bring your attention to this very moment, so that we can join all the facts together. This sound is none other than the one we can often hear related to the lore Star Cutter. In Kirby's Return to Dreamland, when the heroes first step into the lore, and as well as when the ship is attacked by Landia when approaching Halcandra, this exact sound can be heard. So, what's the significance? Why is the lore Star Cutter sound randomly in Neichel's song? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for me to finally present my take on the theory that hides behind this song, that ultimately turns Neichel from a relatively hidden character within this game to one of the most important figures in Kirby lore, given the implications. I believe that Neichel herself turned into the lore Star Cutter, or at least an early version of it, to be able to escape the Forgotten Land in the end. Let's look at what we know so far. She came to regret her decision of staying behind in the Forgotten Land, potentially harboring desires of wanting to follow her people in the end. Then we have the lines of "simply a dimensional gate it's not enough," "relying on AI and having a mechanical heart," "I don't yet have wings, but I will get them soon," and even the one about "a breath on my window." Here is what I believe actually happened. At least Neichel longed to be able to join her people that had previously departed their land. It is likely any other remaining residents may have felt the same. Or maybe only she remained. If we think about it, older people would be the ones most likely to refuse to leave their lands. Whether Neichel stayed behind as to not let them fend for themselves, or because she simply felt similar, we cannot tell. But let us entertain the thought that this was the case, and Neichel happened to be among the youngest of those who remained. Her song does talk about loneliness, so it could have been that only she remained after some years. In an attempt to flee this lonely land, she may have tried to operate or reactivate one of the many new world ships that remain on the planet. We do see it on the underground hangar that a fair amount of them existed, but with a lack of knowledge on how to operate them, it may have proven hard to use them. That is, unless she was the one who was behind the system himself, in which case she'd likely be able to activate the warp and leave the land. With this, The theory that she uploaded her consciousness into a ship that would become the Lord Starkiller can make some sense. The second interpretation of the white wings from earlier can refer to the very white wings that are a part of the Lord's design. If Neichel was the only remaining person, then this would have been the only way. If there were still people around, she may have volunteered to be the one to be digitized, to become the AI, to have a mechanical heart that would allow the ship to exhale with her control. One more detail we can add to all of this is that she may have actually had other prophetic dreams that foresaw her becoming the Lord. Yet another reason for the lyrics to portray the feeling of a dimensional gate is not enough. I interpret it more as in, it's not simply enough to open it like it did before, I need to be the one behind the opening. This would also explain the white wings, because if Neichel simply digitized her consciousness to power one of the 60 spaceships, then that would not have had any wings yet. I am personally more inclined to believe that after Neichel became the AI to one of the ships and managed to make it back to the other ancients, that ship was later modified to the design we've come to know, since it was a special ship that now housed the mind of an important person from their homeland. Another interpretation is that a model of the new world was modified to become the Lord, then had Neichel upload her consciousness to operate it. Whether or not this is true would depend on who still remained on the land. That is the basic theory, but we can go much deeper. If we look back at Return to Dreamland, before you fight Landia, Magolor will share some information with you. Part of it is that when he found the lore, he modified it himself. We don't know exactly what these modifications were, but there is always a chance that the base New World design was left untouched, and Magolor added the rest. He also mentions that the ship has a mind of its own, but has never spoken to him. Incidentally, in the remaster for Return to Dreamland, descriptions were added to the Magolor and lore fight, which simply lacked descriptions on the original release. For the regular mode, the description says, if the spaceship had a mind of its own, what would it think after being used by Magolor? In the EX version, however, it states that the ship itself sensed something wrong with Magolor from when they first met, and though it could just travel away due to being sentient, it didn't. Instead, it hid its true power, so that when Magolor would become a pawn of the Master Crown, someone would be able to stop them. This last excerpt is obtained from the Japanese translation, as English only says, after stealing the crown. I would like to believe this relationship between the lore and Magolor by now factoring in the fact that Neichel is the very mind of the ship. And not just that, by seeing in how she'd bet on simply hiding the power she possessed as the ship so that someone would stop Magolor after falling to the power of the crown, would also complement the argument that she may have foreseen the future in which she'd become the lore, later on to meet Magolor and eventually they would cross paths with Kirby, who would have the power to stop the crown. There is one other relation to Magolor we haven't mentioned yet, which also ties together the points from the lyrics we had pending. Remember the thing about pie and Ferris wheels? The Japanese lyric specifically uses the term red fruit from the last verse on the song, and the terminology just happens to match up with the red fruit Magolor creates in his epilogue, and later on, gem apples. I'm sure the actual mention of that in the lyrics was enough to tick into that direction, even without knowing anything about Neichel. This also opens up new interpretations for the lyrics. Throughout the song, it's constantly mentioned how she wants to run to your side, jump to your side. While this you could have been simply metaphorical or mean the other ancients, it could also be talking about Magolor himself. Remember, the song can often sound like it's talking about different time periods, just like how Twinkling Star Showers was, though in this case it's mainly for the second half of last song. This also makes the mention of rushing to the next town over actually literal, as it can mean the Dream Kingdom. And it would make sense. We know how Magolor got there from his epilogue, but how did he come back to build his many theme parks? I think Neichel as a lord probably sensed his change of heart and eventually went to the dimension where the Dream Kingdom existed to rescue him. Only then could the scene from Merry Magoland in which the Lord Starkiller has come to play make sense. Those are my arguments for the theory that Neichel is the lore itself, with all the evidence I could find to support it. I know some people thought that the lore sounds on the song actually meant the lore itself arrived to pick up and rescue Neichel, but I doubt that's the case. And I think those songs are more of a metaphorical thing from the dead thing to have us thinking about all of this. This is also why the line "I hope I don't meet me" was being overly analyzed, but I don't believe it's more than added flair, though it does harken to an old Meeverse post that it's oddly related to the topic. If anything, maybe the lore has those same sounds because they were part of Neichel's song, the one that she never finished. At least that's what I'd like to believe. It's likely the reason the song wasn't finished is because she had to follow in the steps of her prophetic dream and only got this far in the creation of the song before she had to follow her premonition. I believe that the fact that the song appears as an extra, randomly being added to the sound test, is just the way of the game to show it to us, but it's likely that somewhere in the Forgotten Land, some sort of storage unit holds the very song data we can see from the Diddly D's stage. I have but one last topic to discuss before we end the video, and it's the final lore drop from Elfilin after 100%ing Star-Crossed World. He says that a long time back, when he was still inside Elfilis, he heard a song from across time and space, a song that sounded both cheery, but at times sad. The song is what made Elfilis take aim on the planet, and ultimately had a profound effect on Elfilin. I think at this point we can all assume that the very song was Twinkling Star Showers. After all, it was playing across the New World ships when they left to travel space and time, as well as in the hangar. Also, interestingly enough, it looks like Neichel's singing voice was the very influence that birthed Elfilin as a being, as the kind and compassionate side hidden inside Vector Elfilis. This presents an interesting paradox, however. The song was heard by Elfilis at a certain time in the past, which caused him to launch his attack on the planet, on where he was later captured, had his powers drained, that helped create the New World spaceships, which ended up broadcasting that very song on their departure, when they triggered space-time travel that likely made the song reach Elfilis in the first place. Do you see now? There is no warp without Elfilis, and there would be no Elfilis attack without hearing the song that the warp sequence was broadcasting. Elfilin does also mention how he wishes to meet the singer one day. Only time will tell whether or not we'll have any further reveals about Neichel in future titles. But for now, this is all we have. And with that, we finally finished this insane examination and theory about Neichel and the new lore revealed in Star-Crossed World. I had a lot of fun making these videos. I don't think I had showed such passion for researching and digging into a topic to this degree for a while. I was really obsessed with Neichel as a character and all that expanded from her, and I'd like to believe that the theory that I presented is very sound, using all the evidence we had at hand. We'll probably have to wait a few more years for a new mainline Kirby game, but in the meantime we have Air Riders to enjoy. I really do hope you enjoyed the videos. If you have any thoughts on my conclusions or any comments, then please comment below. That's what theorizing is all about after all. For now, that will be all. Don't forget, you're always welcome in my town. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.